My name is Vijay Gurbaksani. I am the director of the Center for Digital Transformation. And I couldn't be more delighted to welcome my colleague and friend Vibs Abhishek to share his thoughts with you about ChatGPT, the good, the bad, and the ugly of generative AI. But before we do that, just a quick few words of introduction. This is a brand new series we're launching. As many of you know, we already offer something called the Digital Leadership Series, which is really focused on investigating issues of societal and macroeconomic impact related to digital technology. And then as we started planning our activities for this year, one of the things that we sparked, of course, by generative AI and a longstanding demand from our constituents that they wanted to understand more about the emerging technologies and how they impact society. So we decided to launch this brand new series, which we hope we will be proud of in a year or so, but we're calling it the Digital IQ series for obvious reasons. How can we as a community raise our digital intelligence quotient? And these debates and discussions and emerging technologies and the technologies themselves are only going to appear at an ever more rapid speed. So wanted there to be a forum for the community to talk about, discuss, think about these issues. And clearly ChatGPT and generative AI is at the top of everybody's agenda these days. There's something like 20,000 startups already being backed, one of which, by the way, is Vibs' startup in generative AI. And so I couldn't think of anybody better, and happens that he sits next door to me and is a good friend. So we reached out to him and he has graciously agreed to share his expertise on generative AI with all of us. So with that, the last thing I'll say is Vibs will take questions along the way, but he will signal you when he's ready for questions. You can submit those questions either in chat, or you can raise your hand using the reaction button in Zoom itself. So with that, I won't take up any more of your time. Vibs, take it away.
Thank you so much, Vijay. I think there are a lot of people signed up for this, so no pressure. And also, this is the inaugural Digital IQ series session, right? So I hope I can build up the tempo. So try to play it safe and make sure that we have an engaging conversation. Let me share my screen. I took the liberty of changing the title of the talk, Vijay, because ChatGPT is so old school now. Now we have GPT-4. That's the pace at which things are moving in this space. Of course, I intended this as a pun. A lot of what is powering GPT-4 is also very core to what is powering ChatGPT. But it's a fascinating space, and I'm fortunate to be working in this space as a researcher, as an entrepreneur. And just a quick personal story before I go on with today's talk. I've been doing AI for pretty much my entire life, maybe like 25 plus years. This is the moment that I've been waiting for, right? So I've always done work in AI. Of course, a lot of that work has been incremental. I think it has been impactful what AI has been able to do so far, but almost now with generative AI, I feel we are at a place where technology seems magical. And it has a lot of implications for not only what it can do, but also the impact it will have on society. And I think personally, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, but I'm sure a lot of other people in the world are trying to do the same thing. So without any further ado, I'll just sort of launch into this discussion. Quick background about myself. I'm going to spend most time talking about ChatGPT, so I'm going to keep this short. As I mentioned, I've been doing AI machine learning for a long time, did my undergrad in computer science from IIT Kanpur. A lot of my work there and my thesis was on techniques like neural network, which form the core of what is powering ChatGPT-like technology. I worked for a few years and I got bored of working and decided to go back to grad school. So I went to Wharton and it was an amazing experience, and some of the people in the room are friends and colleagues from there. Interesting story, when I landed at Wharton, I told my advisors that I want to apply machine learning to solve business problems. And they told me that no one in business school does machine learning. So now I think the joke is on them. Every time I meet them, I try to rub it into them. where like right now we're a place where everything is driven, especially in business, is been driven by machine learning and AI like technologies. I would not say everything, but to a significant extent. After that, I was a faculty at Carnegie Mellon, where I did more of the same, worked on many AI and natural language processing techniques, and tried to apply that to problems around advertising, e-commerce marketplaces, and some other applications, but really trying to bridge the gap between technology and how markets operate. And then a few years back, I came to give a talk at UC Irvine. It was snowing in Pittsburgh. It was 80 degrees here. And I was like, hey, this is where we should be living. Unfortunately, it's raining outside right now, and it's been raining for the last, probably 2 weeks or so. But I couldn't complain about Southern California weather. So this is sort of what I've been doing on an academic side, building and teaching about AI and NLP. And sometime last year, I was so fascinated by what generative AI could do. Decided to start a company around generative AI. Of course, the focus was not on generative AI. We were not even talking about it for most parts, because it was difficult to explain what generative AI was and could do. But the company initially started out focusing on ed tech, but now the focus has shifted. I'll maybe talk a little bit about this as we get into the presentation. So this is something that I think everyone has seen. I don't think I need to talk about this. ChatGPT just exploded on the scene last December. We had a version of ChatGPT before ChatGPT. It could answer questions. We call it No. We launched this sometime in September last year. But of course, we were keeping it very much under the radar. And fortunately for us, things have just blown out since December. And we are right in the middle of all of this activity. I'm sure this is the screen that all of you are familiar with, but most of the times, this is the screen that you end up getting to, right? So ChatGPT is always at capacity. In fact, today, I was trying it out and trying to figure out if we can run ChatGPT. Looks like it's not going to be possible, but I'm going to run this in the background using the direct access to the playground. So let me, this is a point where I would love to take questions from the audience in terms of what is it that you would like to ask ChatGPT or GPT-4. I'll just share my browser. So please, if you can post in the chat window any questions that you would like me to ask. I will start out with a few prompts just to show you how it works. I'm sure almost everyone knows, but it's good to get you guys started on that. Now, if there was a ChatGPT to switch Zoom windows, that would be amazing. Okay, let's see. So this is the OpenAI playground. It gives you a backdoor into the APIs that ChatGPT runs. So here I can ask a question. Let me start out by asking a question. What is ChatGPT? Can you guys see my screen? Is it too small?
It's okay.
I think I maybe enlarge it too much. So this is, I asked I asked OpenAI, what does ChatGPT explain in the words of Ryan Reynolds? It says, hey there, buddy. So imagine me, Ryan Reynolds, explaining the super cool AI called ChatGPT. Picture a highly advanced language model, like the sassy AI in sci-fi movies, but way more charming and approachable. Right. So it is giving you an answer about what ChatGPT is, but it is trying to speak like Ryan Reynolds. The fascinating thing here is this would have taken a ton of work to build a system that could speak like Ryan Reynolds. You would have to go and teach the system how Ryan Reynolds speaks, and then ask it to do things as Ryan Reynolds would do it. The fascinating thing about technology like ChatGPT or GPT-4 is that it's trained on all the data that exists on the internet, and it sort of understands these nuances. And it can say, this is the answer that I'm giving, but let me paraphrase this as how Ryan Reynolds would sort of answer this question. Let me do another one quickly. So I hope people who are from California can appreciate this haiku. Golden State weeps rain, deserts bloom with new life, and new grace quenches the land. Would love to take any question that folks have. I think there are a few in the chat window. I have a few questions about what ChatGPT could do. Okay, so Rika has a question about who is Vibs Abhishek. I'm not so sure whether it's going to be able to answer, and I think it's going to be embarrassing if it's not able to answer that question, but let's see. See, I told you it's embarrassing. Let's see. Maybe this.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, it's actually picking up my. I think this is all made up. So it's picking up the fact that I was at CMU before this. I definitely don't hold a PhD in economics from Berkeley. It does have some. So this is one problem with ChatGPT, right? It hallucinates. It can tell you things very definitively that that might not be true, right? So if someone doesn't know about me, they'll probably think this information is correct. We'll talk about this towards the end. Any other questions for Dom? So Dominic has a question. Create a case study for students in an MBA program. Let me actually write it here instead of you guys can. I'll have to type it out. Create a case study for. Yeah, marketing strategy. Sorry, folks, my typing skills are not that great against the ethical privacy. Okay. Let's see what ChatGPT has to say. By the way, I'm using GPT-4 here. There's a word limit that is hit, and so now it's continuing that. I can increase the word limit here. As you can see, it's giving you a very, very detailed plan. I don't think we have time to go through the exact plan, but this is, like I've looked at this type of use cases previously, and it's able to answer, create a plan as a marketing agency would create. So it's very powerful in terms of what it can do. It definitely gives you a good head start. It might not be accurate like I pointed out earlier, but it definitely gives you a good head start in building, like setting you up for success and creating the right question. Diane has a question around how can ChatGPT help solve the healthcare provider shortage? I think that's an excellent question. I'll touch upon that point in a little bit. How can ChatGPT help solve that? So any questions that you have from me, I'm going to ask ChatGPT to answer those questions, right? I'll make my job easier.
So Vibs, I have a general question, and I don't know if this will fit what you're doing here, which is that, there is a sense that technologies like ChatGPT are great when the question has a plateau of answers that are pretty good.
Right.
So that even if it picked one versus another, you really don't know that it's bad, for instance, if it were. And, like the hallucination is a totally different thing. But in general, there is a very subjective judgment of, did ChatGPT do a good job? Right? What do you think about that? And, versus situations in which there may be more precision or more steep space in the set of solutions that could be engineered?
Right. So I think that's a great question, Hemant. So at the very core, it's not Google. It has no guarantee on the accuracy of the answer that it produces. It is just, think of this as you give it a bunch of text and then produces text that should follow. And it has no guarantee on the accuracy or the fidelity of the answer that it is producing. So there needs to be a layer that needs to be built in, which makes sure that the answer that it is giving out is actually correct, right? And that's where a lot of innovation is happening. In fact, that's where, for example, Altius is also focusing on is how, like, we are trying to bring ChatGPT-like experiences to products, but the accuracy is super important in that case. So how do we build the infrastructure to make sure that we use the kind of the kind of answers you get, the correctness on not the correctness, the way it talks of things in English. If it's consistent, it's talking as if a human being is talking about this, but at the same time making sure that the answers are accurate and are vetted, right? So there is that process or that layer that needs to sit on top of any of these technologies. But I'll talk about that in just a little bit.
Hey, Vibs, what do you think about this? How can it support healthcare, the shortage of healthcare providers?
Yeah, I think there are some very good points, right? It talks about how it can help in medical education assistant. It can help in triage support, patient follow-up, mental health support, administrative tasks, telehealth services, health promotion and prevention. So there are many use cases of this. And of course, I'm happy to take this question later on and talk about some of the use cases that we have discovered and where we are working, specifically in the healthcare setting of bringing sort of this ChatGPT-like experience to healthcare and insurance tech situations. So let me now go. I'm sure that you guys have a lot of questions, but let's keep moving on because I think there is a bunch of stuff that I would love to cover. But we'll come back to this and maybe ask a few other questions towards the end. So when we talk about, of course, so I gave you some examples of what ChatGPT could do. It could answer questions, it can write poetry, it can explain like you are 5 years old. I've tried to get it to do more complicated stuff. So I think debugging code is table stake. It can debug code, it can write code, but I've tried to get it to teach machine learning, and it does a fairly good job of teaching machine learning. And so hopefully my job is not in danger, but I'm threatened, to say the least. You can design it to play a murder mystery game, and many more tasks. So I think there is this new generation of or skills that are coming up, which is called prompt engineering. How do you prompt GPT-4 or ChatGPT-like technologies to do certain types of tasks? And it doesn't have to be just answering a question. It can engage in a meaningful, long conversation with you back and forth. And I think that's a big differentiator between ChatGPT and everything else that came before that. Previous generation of GPT were not able to have that engaging conversation. And now you can have a relatively long conversation as if you're talking to a real person. But taking a step back, when we think about ChatGPT, it's under the broader umbrella of technologies that we call generative AI. And generative AI, the distinguishing aspect of generative AI is it is able to create things that are fundamentally new. These are things that the model has not seen ever before, and it is able to create a lot of these things. So for example, I created this painting using a tool called Stable Diffusion, where you can give it a prompt, and this is the kind of image I want to create. So I sort of told it, I want you to create a robotic painter that's making a painting in a very colorful environment, right? And it was able to generate, based on that prompt, this particular image. And so generative AI is a broader set of technologies where the AI can actually generate things from thin air in some sense. Of course, it's trained on a lot of historical data, but things it is producing, it has not seen earlier. And that is very different. And so there are different forms of generative AI. The most dominant forms are images, text, and in the text space, this has really blown up. It's almost, or probably even better, that in a lot of situations that what human beings could generate. Some of the other things, it's not as good yet. If you look at creation of images, I think it's getting there. Code, it is getting there. It's not as good as the best programmers. Definitely on creation of videos, it's quite far from creating really realistic videos. On music, there has been a lot of headway in the last few years where it's able to produce relatively high quality music. And I'll show you a clip of that here. Let's see if I can. Can you guys hear my the sound?
No.
No?
What's yours?
Oh, share this. Can you hear it now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is music that's completely composed by AI. I think there was just a prompt, text prompt that someone gave this AI, and based on this entire piece of music has been rendered. So I'll pause it at that. I'm happy to share the sound clip later on. But I find it quite amazing that just based on a simple text prompt, the AI is able to generate something of this high quality. And again, I think that we are just scratching the surface of what generative AI could do. One differentiator of this, when we think about AI, maybe pre-ChatGPT, a lot of the AI that we have been working with is what we call predictive AI. And in this case, the goal is to necessarily predict a label to a data point. So think about, is it going to rain today or not? And I look at all the meteorological data and sort of try to build a model to predict if it is going to rain today or not. So that is what would be predictive AI. Is there an image of a cat or a dog, right? That's predictive AI. How generative AI differs from all of this is the goal of generative AI is to actually output a data point, and preferably a data point that has not been seen earlier. So there is a paradigm shift that's happening in AI from a lot of application being around predictive AI. I think predictive AI is still going to be the mainstay of it's used across the industries. It's very, very dominant. There are many use cases where predictive AI is important. Think of a use case where is a particular machine part going to break down or not? Is my customer, if you think of a bank, I have a customer I'm giving a mortgage to, is that customer going to pay back the mortgage or not? All of those would be predictive AI applications. And so I think they are going to be, they are very popular. They're going to be very, very dominant in the industry. But there is going to be an increasing number of generative AI applications where you're trying to create new things. Think about copywriting. A copywriter is trying to write text about creating a marketing copy. Earlier, AI could not do something like that, and now it could. Think of creating a painter or a photographer trying to start from a canvas. I think the photographer is a wrong term, but someone who is a graphic artist starting out from an image generated from Stable Diffusion or some of the other type of technologies. I think that's going to start increasingly happen more and more. And some of this technology did not exist even 3 or 4 years back. So there is a very rapid innovation happening in the space of generative AI. And like I said, ChatGPT is old news. Now GPT-4 is the new kid on the block. And so what this leads to, right, is there's going to be a dramatic shift over time in the kinds of applications where AI is used. A lot of the applications today where AI is used is where we are looking at tasks that are relatively repetitive, right? A human being was doing that task and sort of trying to decide who to give out mortgages to, for example, or not. And those are the kinds of things that have been automated through predictive AI. We will move from these types of mundane tasks to tasks that are very creative. And I think that is what the generative AI, coming in of generative AI is ushering in, is increasingly there'll be a movement in that direction of moving from mundane tasks. I don't think mundane tasks are going to go away, but we're going to move in this direction where we are looking at more and more creative tasks getting fulfilled through AI technologies. And what this will do over time is there is going to be a big gap between what generative AI could do and what predictive AI could do. So I would say predictive AI is still very powerful and is much better than where generative AI is. But as time goes by and we start generating more and more data, it definitely can surpass a lot of the tasks that predictive AI is doing. In fact, even today, if you think of a classification task, right, which is table stake for predictive AI, those are kind of tasks that generative AI can do very easily. So I could just create a labeling exercise in the playground that I showed you earlier, and it will be able to solve prediction problems too. So I think we are moving in that direction. Again, it doesn't work for everything. It works for text-related stuff. If you're trying to do something like sentiment analysis, it can do a great job. It can't possibly try to find out if the bank should give a loan to someone or not. But we are moving in that direction. And I think in the very near future, in the next 2 to 5 years, generative AI would be able to solve a lot of tasks that predictive AI has been able to solve. Does someone have a question? Okay, if there are no questions, then I'll keep moving on. So let me talk a little bit about what is happening behind the scenes, right? And the reason I think I want to talk about this is this will shed a lot of light on what is the state of the art in generative AI, and what are some reasons to worry about how we are applying generative AI for various applications. So behind the scenes, this is the way most of these algorithms work is there is a neural network. And neural network is essentially a connection of different nodes. So there is an input that I'm getting from this image. And then, so every data point is a pixel. And I combine these pixels to then take to the next step, which is the next layer in the neural network, and say, hey, I'm trying to detect edges in that image. And then in the next layer in the neural network, I might be trying to do some other function and some other function. And so you can have many layers in the neural network, and each layer can have multiple neurons, right? Neurons are essentially connections that are processing all the information that are coming in. This really mimics the human brain, right? So think about how the human brain is structured. We have neurons that are connected to each other. Every time a neuron gets fired, it sort of passes the signal on to other neurons, right? And any particular neuron in that cycle is assimilating information from a bunch of other neurons around itself and trying to figure out whether it should pass on the signal or it should not pass on the signal. That's precisely how this neural network works, but all of this is happening in code, right? Or in silicon. This, for example, is a neural network that is trying to predict, looking at different images and trying to predict if there is a cat present in that image or not, right? And so that's the label that is going to give. So this is part of predictive AI, but this is what we build on. This is the kind of neural network that we build on to then create generative AI type technologies. So before we get into generative AI technologies, one of the things that is different between predictive AI and generative AI is the number of neurons are a lot more, right? So if you think about something like GPT-3, it had 175 parameters, which basically means every edge here is a parameter. Every connection you see is a parameter, and the weight that we have for that edge is what we are trying to estimate by training my model on a lot of data, right? And so something like GPT-3 has 175 billion parameters. Typically, when we look at predictive AI, we'll have a much smaller number of parameters. We'll have a few thousand parameters. Or in a very complicated network, we'll have a few hundreds of thousands of parameters. But we're talking about a very different magnitude when we are looking at generative AI. And so essentially, the building blocks remain the same for generative AI, but they are much more complicated. And with more complexity, we add a lot more capability in the network. So let's talk a little bit about what is powering things like ChatGPT. And they're powered by what we call large language models. Language model is something very simple. It's how do we write in a particular language, right? So if you think about, I don't know if any of you went through the book called Lennon Martin. In our high school, we had to go through that book to understand the English grammar. But it told you the rules for writing things in English. So the language model is very simply that. How do you construct things in English? How do you construct grammatically correct things and meaningful things in a particular language? In the large language model is these models are now trained on internet scale data, right? So all the data that exists on the internet, these models are trained on that type of data. And because of that structure, no one has taught them this is English grammar, but because of the structure that they find on the internet, they're able to learn this automatically, right? How are they able to run it magically? No one knows. But given enough neurons and given enough parameters and enough compute power, and training it on a lot of data just helps us get there, right? And I think that's increasingly the sense that we're getting. A lot of things are black box when we look at AI, like generative AI technologies, but it just gets the work done because it's trained on so much data. And so if you look at large language models, essentially what it uses is a technique called transformers. And it trains on a large corpus of text data to generate human-like text, right? I think this is very important, that the language models that we have today, the state-of-the-art language models we have today, are able to create text as if they were written by a human being, right? And so a very big challenge in AI has been what we call the Turing test, which is when you're talking to someone, if you're able to distinguish this from a person or a computer, and if you could distinguish this computer from a person, the computer has failed the Turing test. But if the computer is able to fool you into thinking it's a human being, it has passed the Turing test. And I think we have very safely passed the Turing test a few years back. And so when you're talking to these things like ChatGPT, it's almost magical that you are not you can't really distinguish that you're not talking to a real person. That's how good these systems have become so far. So the way, very simply, the way these language models work is they look at a bunch of text. So the second law of robotics, and they're trying to predict what should come next. So this is the very core technology, right? Like there is nothing very fancy. There's no knowledge graph, anything getting built. All it is trying to do is trying to predict what's the next word that should come, right? So when I have second law of robotics, the correct output is A. Then when I look at second law of robotics, A, the correct next response is robot. And so on and so forth. It can keep constructing the response. And so when I'm giving a prompt to ChatGPT, it sort of creates the next word in the sequence, and then the next word, and the next word, and the next word. And it will keep doing that for a few thousand words, and that is what generates the answer. But at a very basic level, this is all it's doing. It's trying to predict what's the next word that should come. How is it trying to predict what's the next word that should come? It has looked at all the data on the internet, and it has said, when these words appear, the most probable word should appear. When second law of robotics appears, the most probable thing that should appear is the word when I have second law of robotics A, the most probable word that should appear based on all the data that they have seen is a robot, right? So this is fundamentally, this is how these language models are working, right? And there's nothing more to it. Of course, it's very complicated. It has to be trained on a lot of this data. There's a lot of computational power that's thrown on it. But at a very fundamental, this is how it's working. I think Ken has his hand raised.
So Vibs, is there any going back and reevaluating the word pattern that it's selected to evaluate quality? Is there any iterating back and forth on that as it's
there is. So I think that's I'm going to skip this, and probably I'll go back to that later. But that was a difference between GPT-3 and ChatGPT. And GPT-3 was able to create these human-like responses. But to your point, Ken, in ChatGPT, they got a lot of human coders that could then assess the answer and say, is the answer correct or not? And then that was fed back into the network to retrain the model. So there is that feedback that's going in from in the context of ChatGPT. And this is a typo here. This should be GPT 3.5. But so that was the feedback that was going back to the model to say, the answer that you gave was not correct. Please create another answer. And then it would learn what the right answer is. And of course, there were like human coders who were actually giving it feedback. And in fact, as all of us try ChatGPT, there is a thumbs up or thumbs down response, right? And you can regenerate the answer. And all of that information is going back to OpenAI to retrain the model. so let me just go back very quickly. So I hope this is clear in terms of what is the model trying to do. And the way this model is trained goes back to a very simple philosophy of translating from one language to another. So let's say I have a sentence in French, je suis étudiant, and I'm trying to convert that into English. I am a student. So the way most of these language models work, and GPT-3 is one of them. There are many other. Google has a language model. Facebook has a language model. Amazon is probably going to come up with a language model. But all of these have this transformer technology that is the core of how these language models work. And essentially what they do is they take a particular concept and they encode it into an embedding. An embedding is very simply a representation of the meaning of this sentence that was the input sentence. Sorry, this should be input and not output. And then finally, we take the embedding and then we can convert it into a different language, right? Which is what the decoder is doing. It's taking so the encoder takes the sentence, constructs in a high dimensional space what is the meaning of the sentence, and then a decoder takes that same meaning of the sentence and tries to convert it into a different language, right? So this is how transformers were created. Of course, what I could do is instead of converting from French to English, I can give it one sentence and then I can give a follow-on sentence. So from a technical standpoint, the way this learning is happening is not very different than how translation would happen. But now given one sentence like the prompt in ChatGPT, it's trying to now construct the answer to that prompt in ChatGPT, right? So that's the translation that it's doing. And so transformers are the core technology that are powering this type of interaction. And I think what we have seen in the last few years is there has been a phenomenal amount of acceleration in the development of these language models, right? So GPT was launched in 2018, and it had 117 million parameters. And think of this as the number of parameters just tells you how complex the model is and what is it that it can do. And we have seen a 10 to the power 6 increase from GPT to GPT-4 in just a span of 5 years, right? Actually, even less than 5 years. Where I think progressively the GPT technology has added more and more capabilities, right? So I think GPT-2 was basically a better version of GPT, but GPT-3 was when it actually started creating human-like responses. And then in ChatGPT was where it started incorporating human feedback to retrain the model. And this was a big breakthrough in the language model technology space. And then now what is interesting, and I think we're just trying to learn how GPT-4 works, but it is multimodal. You can give it an image and you can ask questions based on that image. All right. So it's not only asking questions in text, you can give it a video, you can give it an image and ask questions based off of that image. So it understands more than text. And what does all this power help it do? It can actually pass now the bar exam, right? And it can pass a lot of the AP exams. So it's at a point where someone can use GPT-4 to actually crack a standardized exam if they had access to it, right? Now, the philosophical question is, if GPT-4 can crack the bar exam, can it actually be a good lawyer? The verdict is still out. Definitely, I don't want GPT-4 to be defending me if I have a court case against me, but it definitely has the capability of, passing with flying colors many different exams. And I was telling you this earlier. I'll just sort of pause on this. It's no longer just a language model. If you give this image and ask a question, what is funny about this image? Describe it panel by panel. It says, it shows the packaging for a lightning cable adapter with 3 panels. It understands what is being shown in that image. It says panel 1 is a smartphone with a VGA connector. Package, say panel 2 is package for a lightning cable adapter with a picture of a VGA connector on it. And panel 3 is a close-up of a VGA connector with a small lightning connector, right? And it's able to decipher all these images to say what's funny about it, right? That's quite a complicated task. And it says the humor in this image comes from the fact that you're using a USB charging, a lightning cable adapter, but it looks like a VGA cable, which is very, very old school, right? And why would anyone want to do that? So that is what it finds funny. And all of this, it is able to do without any explicit training. It's not trained on what is a VGA adapter. It's not trained on what is a lightning cable. It is not trained on this is humorous, this is not humorous. But just given all the content that exists on the internet, it's able to understand the context of the image, parse it out, and then ask a very specific question about these images. So it's really mind-boggling what this technology can do today. I'm probably going to skip this. There are different types of generative AI. There is one called generative adversarial network that is used to generate images. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, but focus on what is the implication of this, right? And the biggest implication I feel is that when we used to talk about AI till very recently, and I think we'll continue to talk about AI in this context, is we're talking about a few percentage increase in efficiency. So can I increase my processes by 20%? Can I decrease the failure rate of my machines by 30%? And we were talking about incremental, what I would say is incremental. I think these are all very meaningful changes from an ROI perspective. But what's dramatically different is going from a few, like tens of points increase in efficiency to 10 times increase in productivity. So can I give something like ChatGPT to a copywriter and can they write 10x more articles in the same amount of time that they were writing one article? Can my programmers write 5 times the number of code that they were writing earlier? So I think that's the scale at which we're talking about. And of course, a lot of generative AI is focused on tasks that are being done by human beings, but now they can do all of these tasks much, much faster, right? Think about, I think Dan had this question about how can we apply this to the healthcare setting? Think of a nurse that was triaging patients. Now you can do the same kind of triaging using generative AI at 10x or 100x the scale, right? At a fraction of the cost. So there are many implications of where generative AI can be used in designing, programming, healthcare, customer support, which is where we are trying to use it, education, business, research. I think I think we are only limited by our creativity in terms of where all we can apply generative AI. So I'll just talk very quickly about the application that we are using. We are trying to bring the ChatGPT-like power to SaaS products. And the first thing that we're trying to do here is use it for customer support. So we have created No, which is the super user that sits on top of products and can help you navigate products like Tableau, R, Alteryx. And when you're stuck, you don't know how to do something, you can go open up this chat window and basically ask questions as you would ask a colleague or as you would ask an expert on the product, and it helps you navigate through these through tough situations in the product. And so what we have seen is it leads to much more efficient help. So people can find help much quicker. And it also leads to a dramatic reduction in the support team that companies need to hire, right? So you can reduce your support staff to 1/4 what you needed to have earlier, because most of these questions can be answered through something like No. Programming, this is GitHub did this study a couple of weeks back, where they saw how GitHub Copilot, which can generate code, leads to increases in programming productivity increase. So most programmers actually see there is an increase in their productivity of the order of 2 to 3x when they start using GitHub. We use it all the time. In fact, I've used it in my class. to get people to debug their code in Python. We use this at Altius all the time in for programming, for generating some sample code, or we are running into an error using GitHub Copilot to actually debug the code. Led to dramatic increases in efficiency, both in classroom, where I can get them to do more complicated stuff, but also at Altius. Again, you can do a lot of things. You can also ask it questions about how to solve world peace. But don't have enough time. Now, what I want to talk about is the pace of change in this market is unprecedented. These are things that were just released last week. So GPT-4 was launched last week. Microsoft launched Copilot 365, which is I can, in any product in Microsoft, I can go and ask it to create a proposal from a meeting note, or I can ask it to create a slide deck based on a simple prompt. I can say, hey, create a slide deck, create a marketing slide deck based on these 5 inputs, and we'll be able to do that. A company called Adept raised $350 million for bringing ChatGPT-like experience. They're sort of a competitor to us. They're trying to bring a very similar experience to products like Salesforce, Craigslist, Google Cloud. Google announced their own language model called Palm, and you can sign up for that and start using it as OpenAI. And then a company called Midjourney launched version 5 of its image generating program. And you can sort of see this image is very, very realistic, but it's completely fictitious. So this is all the stuff that has happened just in the last week. And I believe there is an announcement coming from Adobe this week and also from NVIDIA this week. So it seems like everyone in the world is just working on generative AI. I don't know why this has happened, but a lot of we have crossed the inflection point where a lot of these innovations are coming to market on almost a daily basis. This is an image that was generated in Midjourney. You can sort of see this is the prompt: German short-hair pointer enjoying a windy day on a boat on the Chesapeake Bay, 8K cinematic. This is as good as, I would say, a photograph that a professional photographer would take, right? And so now we are in the realm of, even on the image front, I think text, I think that's already where GPT is much better. Language models are much better than what human beings can do, at least most human beings could do. And we are getting into the realm where on image also generative AI is competing with the best in class. And so I think this is, I just want to do a quick time check. Vijay, how much time do I have?
You've got 6 minutes officially, but please feel free to take a few more because this is really interesting and I think this is important.
Awesome. So, I think in the generative AI land, or sort of when I put my entrepreneur hat on, everything is great and we'll change the world using generative AI. But when I put my academic hat on or my economist hat on, we always want to be more cautious in terms of what's the impact of these technologies and what could actually go wrong. And I think a few things can definitely go wrong, right? One is all of these models are trained on internet data. We know very clearly that a lot of the internet data is biased, and these biases would translate into all these models. And then if these models are then being used by us to make decisions and to do our work, the bias is only going to get amplified. So that's a very, very big challenge that I think needs to be overcome before these models should become more commonplace. These models are prone to hallucination. So it gave information about me being a professor at CMU and having done a PhD at UC Berkeley. Clearly not correct, but it was very definitive about how it sort of said what it said. So these models are prone to hallucination, and that's a very big issue. And I think I would cut them a little bit, so these models a little bit of slack. They were never trained to be things that could tell you facts about the world around you. At a very core level that I've explained earlier, they are just trying to predict what should come next. Of course, the marketing and the messaging is very different, which is where the problem I feel lies, is people are using this as a healthcare assistant without any vetting. People are using this to find out about what's happening in the world around them on a daily basis. And these models are trained in 2021. That's the data that they have seen so far. So they don't know what reality is, and they have no way of knowing reality. They have nothing that is telling them this is real versus not in the training process. So they are, by virtue of that, they're just prone to hallucination. And we should be very mindful of how we use them. And we can use them, but how do we build on top of the current technologies to remove some of these problems that exist? I think there's going to be a very big impact on the labor market. I'm going to take a minute to talk about that in more detail in just a little bit. But I think fundamentally, one thing that I get very worried about is technology is evolving at a pace that we can't comprehend. What is the long-term impact of this technology, right? So if you look at this graphic here, this just shows how different technologies have progressed in the past. And if you look at language understanding, it's almost like a straight line. And it is very challenging as someone who has studied and does research on understanding impact of technology. It's changing way too fast for us to comprehend how does it affect society, how does it affect markets, and how does it affect all of us as individuals. And we need more people to be thinking about these things because technology is not, the rate of change of technology is not slowing down anytime soon. It's getting faster and faster. I just gave you an example of what has just happened in the last 1 week. And I think we're going to see continued innovation in the space in the next couple of months or next few years. It's definitely, I think I talked about how this might affect the labor market. And this is a question that I asked GPT-4. And I asked it, what are some jobs that GPT-4 would replace in the next 4 years? So I think it's very confident in sort of giving out that these 20 jobs. But I wouldn't say it's very far from reality. If you think about customer service representatives, it's top of the list. That's something that we are already seeing at Altius. We are able to replace jobs. Right now, people are not getting fired. They're doing other things, more complicated things. But customer service representative, definitely an area that is a cause for concern. Content writers, personal tutors. I would even say professors. Like you could create a very engaging tool in ChatGPT today that can offer very personalized learning to an individual. Of course, it requires a little bit of innovation, intelligence, creativity, and how do you get it to behave in the way that you want it to behave. But clearly, it can be a very good teacher for different types of skills. Copywriters, paralegal. So there are many professions that I feel are going to be threatened by some of these advances. And I think it's not going to be that AI is going to replace all jobs in these fields, but few people will be able to do the jobs that a large number of people were trying to do in the past. And I think that's a big cause for concern. And, I think this always, I think about this as there are advantages of technology like this. Everyone can do more. And this will lead to a new skill set called prompt engineering. But this also leads to a dramatic decrease in the skill gap. Because right now, the best guys are very, very like 10x better than the worst guys. But if you use technology like GPT-4, everyone rises up, but also the gap between the best and the worst dramatically narrows down. So what are the implications of that? I personally don't have a mathematical model in my mind to say what are the implications of that. But again, an interesting thing to study about. And definitely, I think that fewer people will be required to do jobs. And there'll be a big demarcation between people who have access to these technologies versus not. And I don't know if you know, but ChatGPT is not available in many countries across the world. And so people who have access to this, especially in the Western world versus people who do not have access to it, will have very different outcomes and will be able to do very different types of things. And I think that will, again, increase the digital divide than reducing it. It will reduce it in geographies where everyone has access to it. But in cases where people don't, I think it will increase the divide. And I'll just leave it at the last thought, which was, I feel that generative AI is very powerful, and we are still wrapping our heads around, at least I'm wrapping my heads around what it can do. But it will bring about a dramatic shift in how we think about intelligence. And that shift has already happened once, right? So if you go back maybe 2 decades, intelligence was how much could you memorize? And the epitome of that was playing chess, right? Can you memorize all the chess moves? And then when you're playing with your opponent, just recreate that in your brain and sort of say, this, if we move this way, then this is what the gameplay is going to be. So a lot of that was about memorization. And after the coming of the internet, right, I think that fundamental model of intelligence changed. Now you no longer needed to learn stuff and memorize it, but the important skill was synthesizing, because you had access to all the information on the internet. I think generative AI is going to lead to yet another shift. We are going to move from synthesis to creativity, where the synthesis is already happening through AI. It can go and look at all these disparate bits of information and can synthesize that and give you an answer or give you a suggestion. But I think the intelligence will lie in how do you put disparate pieces of information together and create something new. And I think that can lead to, I wrote an article about this, but this will lead to some kind of a renaissance, cultural renaissance, where people could do a lot of very cool, innovative things by riding on the wave of AI. So I'll just pause there, and I would say it's really fascinating what generative AI could do, but as a society, we should think very carefully about how to harness the power of this type of technology, and then how to make it accessible to everyone. If we don't make it accessible to everyone, we're just going to create a very, very bifurcated world. And probably that's not something that we should be looking forward to, especially in this audience. So I'll just pause there.
So Vibs, let me just quickly jump in and thank you for putting together this amazingly compelling presentation and deliver it in pretty much an hour, because we took the first few minutes of your time. So this was sort of really inspiring, challenging. We're going to see a very different world in the next decade than the world we're just coming out of. And we've been talking about how disruptive technology has been. And one can only begin to imagine or ponder what the next 10 years holds in store for us. So thank you for putting this together. But what I would like to ask is if you could stay for a few more minutes, and
Definitely.
we like to stick on time for the formal part of the, stay on time for the formal part of the program. So of course, folks, if you need to leave, thank you for joining us and really appreciate your interest and support of our initiatives. It's the community that gives us the energy to keep going. You know, we've gotten an international audience for this session, so it talks to sort of our reach, but also the sort of Vibs experience and expertise in the sophisticated advanced topic. But if you need to leave, please go ahead. And for those of you who want to stick around for maybe 5 or 10 more minutes, we will just interact and let you ask Vibs a few more questions. And maybe we should plan to wrap by 6:45. That's okay with you, Vibs?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
All right, so let me please raise your hand. We'll make this part of it interactive, and if you could raise your hand using the reaction option on Zoom, and then we'll just take your questions as they show up. There are some questions already, Vibs, you know, from Natalie Blair on regarding ownership copyright. There's a lot of those. Somebody else, Frank, has also talked about this. Maybe comment on the copywriting.
I think that's a very, very important question about copyright. So I think a lot of these types of generative AI models have been trained on historical data, and maybe a lot of that content is copyrighted. As I understand it, and I would love to get an opinion from a lawyer in the room, if I read a book and I then reproduce some of the ideas in different words, that's not technically violating copyright. And I think from that level, from that extent, some of these generative AI models, not all, but some of these generative AI models are creating things that are fundamentally new, things that have not been seen earlier. So it's not verbatim. It might resemble things that have been produced earlier, but it's not exactly a true copy. Of course, some of these generative AI models are generating verbatim things, and that's definitely a copyright issue. But I feel there's definitely going to be a legal debate around this. Stable Diffusion got sued recently. I'm sure Midjourney would get sued. OpenAI would get sued. So I think there is going to be a public debate about what is kosher versus what is not kosher. I also believe that the model that the data is trained on, the data that the models are trained on, should be able to capitalize a little bit on the economic benefit that's coming from all the generative AI applications. So I think that's the viewpoint that I hold, but I'm not a lawyer to really tease out the legal angle there.
Scott, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Vijay. This is extraordinary. And I think you validated what I think Bill Gates said, that this was like the PC, like the internet, and now this is one of the major pivots that's happened. Absolutely. I'm in healthcare, and there's already circulating amongst my colleagues some prohibitions amongst some large organizations to be either you can't use it for certain kinds of clinical applications, that is ChatGPT and the like. But otherwise, over here, it's sort of still an experiment. And I think those are valid. And it's with all the promise. I would forecast, and maybe you will as well, there's going to be an accident. Something's going to happen where there's going to be a major implication of someone relying on a ChatGPT thing. And much like the Challenger incident, that didn't lead. It kind of got beyond human comprehension. There was a book written afterward called Normal Accidents. I'm wondering what do we need to do to make sure that that doesn't get completely in the way, because there'll be countless hearings in Congress and so on that will thwart progress. What's your thoughts and advice?
I think it's an interesting, I think I'm not wise enough to offer advice, but I'll just offer my thoughts on this. I feel, so think of this as any type of like nuclear energy, for example. You can use it for good or you can use it for bad, or accidentally it can do bad in the world around you. I think the energy needs to be channelized, and I think the channelization comes from some of the narrow applications that like we are building, but many other companies are building like us, which is, given this power, how do we sort of build guardrails around it to make sure that it is safe for use, it is accurate, it is predictable. And I think that's one approach to take, is how do we take all of this power and channelize it in the right fashion with the right guardrails around it. Of course, there will be people who, like OpenAI probably doesn't have that. They don't want to curtail the power of what GPT-4 can do. They want more and more people to be using it. So I think there's a little bit of incentive misalignment there, but they have been very proactive so far in making sure the answers are not like, they have been able to reduce racist answers, for example. They have been able to reduce, OpenAI GPT-4 acting up, or ChatGPT acting up and pretending as if it's going to take over the world. I think what we need to do is really understand as a society, what is core to this technology. And at a very core, like I said, it is predicting the next thing that should come in line. It doesn't understand how the world works. It has no sense of the structure in the world. And so when we are applying it to different applications, we should have that, at least that background in mind as we're trying to harness the power. And so it's not an end all and be all, and it has its limitation, and we should understand the limitation. And I think we should educate everyone about these limitations.
Hey, Vibs, let's take two more questions. We have Redford and my recent student, Teresa, so I have to give her the last word. So let's take Redford and Teresa. And then we'll call for you. Redford, go ahead.
Oh, I'm not sure if Redford is there.
So his question is, how will generative AI impact the Marshall frontier? Or at least that's the one on.
I think it's the Martian frontier. If I have
with
it.
an L, so I'm not sure what that means. Martial arts. Well, let's
frontier. I think it's interesting. I feel that there are many implications. In fact, we have David on the call here, and maybe David can talk to this. But there are many ways in which it can impact the military frontier. One is in training, right? Like I said, one of the biggest applications of generative AI is going to come in education. And as the world around us is changing, our armed forces need to be trained on the latest and the greatest. And this can offer a very efficient way of training our workforce, and efficient not only from an organization perspective, but from an individual perspective, training them specifically on skills that they need to know. The second thing I feel is it's going to be very helpful when you're executing your task or your duties as an assistant that helps you execute these tasks. So think about you're fixing a military aircraft and you come across a piece that you don't understand. You can very quickly go and ask this question about what does this piece do? How do I replace this piece? How do I repair it? And it can give you that answer on the fly, right? And clearly, like, you can't do this at scale from a repository of question and answers. You have to be able to do this in a generative fashion at that point in time, very, very quickly, right? So generative AI is the technology that can enable something that level of interactivity. You can't do this in any manual fashion.
So Vibs, just to jump in for a second, I did a session for the Marine Corps about a month ago, and they are really thinking about this long and hard. Teresa's nodding at because of one of her classmates, but it's amazing because it's a lot of the things we talk about in normal, for lack of a better word, life. There's so much so imagery that needs to be analyzed. They focus a lot on situational awareness, like what is the world around us and a lot of it is about traditional AI as well, which is, predictive maintenance is just as big for the military as it is for a big, large industrial manufacturer. But with that, let me just turn it over to Teresa, and then we'll call it a night. Teresa, take it away.
Thanks. Great presentation. A lot of interesting content. Coming from you talked about your background starting at school, and this was like a cutting edge, technology that nobody really accepted. How would you go about approaching using AI in an organization that's a little bit resistant to using the new technology?
I would say, so always start problem first. Don't say we want to use AI. I think, and that's a lot of times we run into the challenge of saying, hey, this is cool, let's use this technology, and then figure out a use case. I think we should work backwards and say, here is a problem that's a daunting problem for us to solve. And some of these problems can be solved through AI, and some of these problems cannot be solved through AI. But I would say starting problem first, because that's a pain point that everyone is feeling, and sort of give them a world of what if we could solve this problem. These are the 5 things that it enables us to do. I think that's probably a better place to start. And in that journey, somehow you can use AI to solve that problem. And I think AI is so ubiquitous that I'll be surprised if AI is not a part of the solution. But I think it depends on the maturity of the company or the organization. How much data do you have to solve that problem? And I think some of that barrier to using AI is reducing, because in like the predictive AI world, you need to have a lot of data of your own to be able to solve these problems. But with generative AI, you don't need that. You can just give it a small sample of your data and still build a solution. So I think starting problem first is very, very important. In fact, in my class, I talk about this machine learning for business canvas, where the entire point of that exercise is figuring out if AI is actually the right way to solve this problem. But start problem first.
Great. With that, let me call it even. Thank you again, Vibs, for a fantastic and
this was great
presentation. And
wonderful audience.
If any of you have suggestions for future themes and speakers about technologies that you're particularly interested in, it has to be, of course, a broad interest. It can't be a very limited scope technology, but we would love your ideas. And again, thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful evening. And once again, thank you, Vibs, and all of you.
Thank you so much.